Why are humans obsessed with stories? Doesn't matter if it's films, TV, a book, myths, religion, the news, or even just gossip that you hear as a neighbour passes by. Even our memories are stories. Stories that we tell ourselves, stories that we tell other people. But why? Why does a sequence of events that change over time, with tension and release, and build-ups and climb-downs, why does that move us so deeply? And more importantly, why does music, which often has no words at all, do exactly the same thing? Hello, welcome to today's video. My name is Richard and I like to make videos here on YouTube about modular synth and creativity and so on. But in today's video, I want to talk about something that I've been pondering for some time, and that is stories and why as human beings we are so obsessed with stories. As I mentioned in the intro there, we have stories throughout our entire history, throughout our lives, whether it be films, movies, TV shows. Our religions are based on stories, our culture is based on stories. We get stories every day in the news, we watch on TV, or that we read in the papers, if anybody still reads papers. But stories are not just about entertainment. Stories can teach us. They teach us things about ourselves, teach us about our history. They teach us how to laugh, how to cry, how to be happy, how to be sad. Stories are the most important part of human existence. But what actually is a story? Well, a good story usually has lots of ups and downs and twists and turns. But I would like to think of a story as being something that is more than just a sequence of events. It's a way of communicating changes in emotion, changes in energy. And that is usually done through spoken word or by observing action taking place as if you were there. When we watch a film, we're watching events in time, and those events have been sequenced in a way and shot in a way that makes us feel certain emotions. And so really the intent of the people making the film is to have an emotional response from the audience. Now that probably seems pretty obvious. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say in this video is probably pretty obvious, but it's kind of necessary to answer some of the questions that I've been pondering. And I'm not entirely sure that I have all the answers. Really just an exercise in pondering that I find interesting. Maybe you will too. So let's ask the question, what actually is a story? Because stories are everywhere. And does a story require words? Well, if we consider a story to be a communication of emotions, of energy, then perhaps no, a story doesn't need words. Ultimately, stories are contrast. They are tension, movement, release, transformation. There's always a beginning. There's always something that happens in the middle where there's a transformation, a change, and there's always an ending. Even the simplest of stories will have a stable beginning point, some sort of disruption, and then a resolution. Or perhaps even the opposite, a failure to resolve. And so I'd say that stories are not always about the plot. That's the explicit meaning of what's happening. But they're more about the changes in emotion and changes in energy that happen throughout. The plot is just the device that gets those changes across to the audience. So they're about energy and emotion changing through time. And if none of these things change, then we don't really have a story. So let's think about this in terms of music. Well, music happens in time, just like a story does. Music has a start and a middle and an end. Even the most relaxing of ambient tracks will have some kind of change to it. Maybe sort of density changes or textural changes or the expectation that something's going to happen, and then it doesn't always happen. And it's not always about the things that happen. Sometimes it's about the perception, what the listener or what the audience perceives is going to happen or perceives as happening. Contrasts in loud and quiet, fast and slow, stable, unstable, familiar, strange, uncomfortable. And so when you're listening to a piece of music, It's not that the piece of music is describing a story, more so it is enacting a story, albeit a non-verbal story, and it's through those energetic changes that happens. The music doesn't tell you what's happening, the music makes you feel what's happening. And so why does so much music today, so much modern pop music, why does it feel so empty? Well, maybe it's because we don't have that variation, we don't have those changes, we don't have those ups and downs in there. It's all one level, it's all bland. I remember watching, as I do from time to time, some Rick Beato videos, his top 10 Spotify countdowns, and I can't remember the tracks now, but there's been numerous times where he's listened to a track and it's been the same thing, just the same backing all the way through with somebody rapping over the top of it or something like that, and there is no variation, no change to what's happening. Or perhaps a track where there's a lot of density there, but it never lets up. It's constant all the way through. It's overload all the way through, and it's compressed so much that it never changes. Again, it's too much all the time. And so we don't have any contrast in those pieces of music, and those pieces of music don't give us the feeling of taking us on a journey or telling a story, which is why perhaps we don't respond to them so well. And I think this is where sometimes as well modular can fall down. I know I've definitely been guilty of sticking a video up here on YouTube that's an hour long when nothing really happens. It sounds lovely for about 2 minutes, if that, but nothing changes. It's great to just sort of sit there in the background, which a lot of ambient music does that, but there's no journey to be taken on. It's emotionally unmoving. It has no story. And so if you are creating a story with your music, you don't need a plan. You don't need to compose a story. It's not necessary to have characters or narrative. Maybe sometimes those things can help. Maybe having a theme helps, but it's not always necessary. What is necessary is an attentiveness to what you're doing, the ability to listen to the music as you are making it, and to be able to hear and to notice where the music wants to go, where there needs to be a contrast. And so you can ask yourself questions like, what is different now from a minute ago? Where is there tension building, or where is there not tension building? Where does there need to be a resolution? And so within music, the story can emerge. It doesn't need to be planned out. Now, of course, that takes time and effort, and having to sort of do some work and then listen back to it and make some changes, and then do some more work and listen again and make some more changes. But that's part of the process, isn't it? We patch, we listen, we respond, we change. We patch, we listen, we respond, we change over and over again, until eventually the story reveals itself through a back and forth between the person and the music. And so the story isn't really something that you impose on the music, it's something that you notice, and then you can feed into it. So how can you make your music more story-like? Well, one thing you can do is to try and think in terms of before and after. So what was the music like before? What was it like after this thing happened? What will it be by the end? Even a subtle change is enough sometimes. How can you make changes to your music? Well, there's lots of ways, and those are the choices that you have as a composer, whether it be through dynamics, making things louder and quieter, or texture, increasing the number of voices that there are, whether it be through changing pitch, having a high pitch section or a low pitch section, or where the pitch is moving wildly, or where the pitch is staying fairly constrained. All of the different musical techniques that we have available to us are there for us to use to implement variation and contrast throughout the piece. A lot of the times, it's not, as I say, it's not a planned thing, it's experimentation. You try something and, just let it happen. Don't undo it. See what comes of it. Let there be consequences to what you do with your modular. A lot of the time with my music that I make, I like to try and find a point where everything can fail, where everything can kind of collapse, like the textures collapse, or removing a voice and then not replacing it, or things just kind of degenerate into noise or chaos. But also, don't forget, sometimes it might be silence that can be the change. That's something that I will admit, that's something that I try to do, but often fail, because I get too caught up in so many other exciting things that are happening that I forget that silence is a really important and really useful way of creating contrast. But I think another thing is to try and avoid constant intensity. Something that's really beautiful, if it carries on for a long time, it becomes a little bit sickly. So you need something that's a little bit harsh, a little bit ugly to contrast it. Lots of things happening all at once can be really interesting, but if it goes on for too long, it becomes boring. And then actually, a single voice, a single sound will be more interesting. And it also gives chance for the listener to breathe. If you're listening to something and there's lots of things going on, it's very noisy, it's all the same, it can be too much information, and the listener needs to have a little rest, a little breather, before you come into the next part. And of course, whatever ideas you might have in your head about what this story is, if you even have ideas about that, we remember that this is all implicit. Somebody else listening to it may well and probably will have completely different ideas of what that music means and what it means to them. So you don't need to explain the story, because you just have to trust the listener that they will respond to it however they want to. And that is because I really do believe that as humans we are kind of hardwired to notice and to respond to these changes, these energetic changes or emotional changes. And that is why we love stories so much. And that is why we love music so much, because good music often has these changes in there. And in fact, when you look at most art forms, you find that they are based on contrasting things happen. Not everything, not all of the time, because there's always an exception to every rule and so on. But a lot of art is about contrast and change, even when the meaning is not explicit. But at the end of the day, why is any of this important? Why does it matter? And does it matter? I like to think that it does. I like to think that some of these things are interesting to ponder. It matters to me, I guess. And in this age of sort of infinite content, I think what we're seeing now, especially with the advent of AI, is that people want to respond to stories even more. But more importantly, what people want is not perfection. They want the humanity. They want things that are a little bit rough around the edges. And stories can help with that. Human stories, because they help us to generate connection as well. Stories create that shared experience. If I tell a story to you and then you go on and tell it to somebody else, there's a connection between us. And all of these things, all of these contrasts, all of this energy and emotion, it makes things feel alive, and it invites us to pay attention. And in this world that we have now, where there's so many things grabbing for attention and inviting you to click on something or scroll or whatever, it's so important. Attention is the rarest resource that we have. And this perhaps is why music has always been communal to a certain extent, because there's ritual, there's ceremony, there's shared experience, shared listening, and all of these things bring people together, which I think, crazy as the world is at the moment, this is what we need more of. We need to bring people together. A lot of the time we probably do this instinctively as well, because we are so tuned into change and contrast and shifts in energy and so on. Because we're so aware of it when we hear things or read things or watch things. When making music, it's kind of instinctive to sort of do this to a certain extent. But sometimes, it doesn't hurt to try and do it a little bit more. And to embrace the decisions that you make when you are making music, and maybe even to to exaggerate them. You know, if you're going to make a noisy section, make it really noisy. If you're going to make a quiet section, make it really quiet. Highlight the contrasts even more than you normally would. And so I think, you know, telling a story with your music is so important, and it will make your music so much better. But you don't need to, I'm not saying you need to become a storyteller, you don't need to start thinking about narratives and so on, because you already do that anyway by enacting change within the music. And all you really have to do is listen to what you are making and listen to what you're producing and ask questions. Ask questions of yourself and ask questions of the music. So when you listen back to your own music, what do you hear? What questions does it prompt you to ask? Where does your story change? Where does it hesitate? Where does it end? Let me know in the comments below. As I say, this is something that I've really been pondering for some time, and I'm not sure that I have all the answers really, or even all the questions at this point. And you know, I probably will keep pondering this, but it's something that I find really interesting, this idea of story, and why as human beings we are so attached to story since the dawn of time, since the first cave people you know, put their handprint on the wall and created a piece of art, or created a scene to record what was happening, record their experience. And really it's not just music, it's all art. All art is about story, and all stories are art, even if it's just hearing that gossip from your neighbour as they walk down the street. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed this video, I hope you found it interesting, and if you have, drop a comment, and of course, as ever, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Cheerio.